To get everything you want, you need to learn how to interact with people and interpret reality correctly. This process consists of 6 parts, and I'll walk you through them one by one so that your life can change forever. And let's start with the first part. Your thoughts are not the territory. We don't see things as they really are. Everyone has their own perception of reality, which doesn't match reality itself. For example, a map is your perception of the world, that when you communicate with someone, they must listen to you or do something. But territory is what happens in your reality. For example, you say something and people interrupt you, argue with you, and don't want to talk to you. That's the reality of territory. Here's another example. For instance, you're walking down the street at night thinking that no one will rob you, because by law, robbing and beating people is forbidden. Those are your thoughts, but then you get beaten and robbed. That's the territory, that's reality. It turns out that your thoughts weren't the territory, which means you were factually wrong, and your assumptions were useless. You always need to compare your thoughts with reality. A map is how we imagine the world, and territory is the world itself, just as it really is. Imagine you've arrived in a new city and are looking at a map. It shows streets, parks, buildings, everything is clear and convenient. But the map doesn't convey the smell of baked goods from a cafe, the music of street musicians, or the warmth of the sun on your face. It's useful, but it doesn't convey the whole reality. The same thing happens with our perception of life. Each of us has our own map, a view of the world that we've been building since childhood. It's shaped by our experiences, upbringing, culture, habits, and past events. We don't see reality directly. We always interpret it through our own personal filters. When we understand this, everything becomes simpler. We stop considering our views as the absolute truth and start being more flexible, open to new ideas and perspectives. For example, John and Emily are planning a vacation. John wants adventure, mountains, travel, new encounters. Emily dreams of tranquility, the ocean, a hotel, a spa. Each is convinced that the right way to relax is only the way they prefer. This can easily lead to arguments, but if they realize that everyone has their own map of the world, they can agree, for example, on a couple of days of activities and a couple of days for relaxation. This principle also helps in everyday communication. If you understand that people have different maps, it becomes easier to reach an agreement. When someone reacts rudely, it's not always anger. Perhaps it's simply important to them to be respected. Once you realize this, you can say the same thing more gently and avoid conflict. In psychology, this principle helps us see that fears and doubts aren't reality itself, but our interpretations of it. They can be changed. In business, it teaches us to see the value in different opinions and make decisions that take everyone into account. In relationships, it reminds us that loved ones also view the world in their own way, and respecting these differences brings harmony. Finally, understanding that the map is not the territory makes us more humble and freer. We will never create a perfect map of the world, but we can constantly update it, discovering new things, trying, learning, and looking at things from a different angle. After all, the richer your map, the more interesting your life. So observe but don't assume, and ask rather than guess. Part 2. Behavior and intentions are different things. Intention is the goal that lies behind all our behavior, and this intention is ultimately positive for a person. Whatever we do, talking, running, arguing, watching a movie, all of it serves a specific purpose. We brush our teeth for health, buy new shoes for comfort, and a new car for prestige, read articles for knowledge, and drink coffee in the morning for vigor. Even seemingly negative actions like tantrums, depression, or allergies almost always have an intention behind them. When people who were rescued after attempting to jump off a roof were asked, "Why did you do that?" they would answer something like, "I wanted to finally find peace." To learn how to influence people, you need to distinguish behavior from intention. Here's an example of behavior. A person eats fast food, breaks everything in sight, cries. That is the behavior, and their intention might be peace of mind, pleasure, or attention. For example, a boss yells at his employees, not because he's a bad person, but because he wants peace of mind. If the work isn't done well, his children and family will suffer, and he won't be able to provide for them. You always need to dig a little deeper. Here's another example. A couple argues and breaks dishes, not because they're unreasonable, but because their intention is to be accepted and heard. By understanding a person's intentions, we can influence them. Therefore, you should never judge yourself by your intentions or others by their behavior, because every human action stems from an intention. And always remember that every action stems from a positive intention. For example, a person resents their parents because they didn't raise them properly, but if their parents had known how to raise them properly, they would have done so. For example, a person criticizes others and seems angry or arrogant, but the underlying motivation might be that they want to help others avoid mistakes or unconsciously strive to feel competent, needed, and heard. Their intention is not to destroy, but to preserve their sense of significance. Another example, a person is jealous of their partner. On the surface, this looks like distrust and control, but deep down, it's a desire to maintain the connection and feel loved and safe. Jealousy is a distorted form of care, stemming from the fear of losing intimacy. Part 3. We always communicate, even when we are silent. Any action, and even inaction, is a signal that can be learned to read, like text. This aligns perfectly with what former FBI agent Joe Navarro does. He shows that people constantly send nonverbal signals. They just don't always realize it. When a husband and wife walk side by side in silence after an argument, there isn't just an empty space between them. There are tons of nonverbal meaning. They aren't speaking, but their bodies, their glances, the distance between them, the pace of their steps, and even their breathing are already speaking too loudly. Part 4. The meaning of communication is the reaction. We may have the best intentions and genuinely want to help someone, but if after what you say the person gets angry at you and walks away, the problem lies with you. When we communicate, we tend to judge ourselves by our intentions. I wanted to help. I told the truth. I was just explaining. But the other person judges us by their reaction, that is, by how they felt after the conversation. If after what you say, the person feels pain, irritation, or hurt, then for them, the meaning of your words is exactly what they perceived it to be, not what you intended to convey. This is a fundamental shift. The meaning of a message isn't what you put into it, but what the other person gets out of your words. Imagine you're telling a friend, "You made a mistake on the project again. I just want you to grow professionally." Your intention is to support them and help improve the outcome. But if they then shut down, get angry, and say, "You're always criticizing me," then the meaning of your communication to them is an attack, not concern. This means that the wording, tone, or context was chosen in a way that undermined the perception of your intention. You expected growth. They took a blow to their self-esteem. You may be absolutely right on the facts, but if the person becomes negative after the conversation, it means you failed to convey the message in a way that matched their perception. This doesn't mean you have to adapt to everyone, but it does mean it's important to understand the emotional framework of the person you're speaking with. Communication is not a monologue, but an act of influence. If the result of that interaction is a negative reaction, it means you missed the mark, even if your truth is objective. So first ask yourself, what is the goal of my communication? And what reaction do I want to elicit in order to achieve my goal and communicate successfully? Part 5. There are no defeats, only feedback. Thomas Edison received 9,999 instances of feedback on how not to make a light bulb, and 1 instance of positive feedback on how to make one. Whether you face defeat or victory, you shouldn't feel overwhelming euphoria or joy, because you might lose focus and sabotage your goal by becoming arrogant, failing to see where you're going wrong. For example, I made a lot of money at 16 and started acting very arrogantly toward people, thinking I was the king and could do anything. I stopped seeing my mistakes, focusing only on my victories, and suddenly I had no money left. I stopped communicating normally with my parents. I re-evaluated my entire life, thinking about where I'd gone wrong and what I could have done better, and realized that I'd gotten drunk on my own success. That's why whether you lose or win, you shouldn't let your emotions get the best of you. Here's an example of meeting a girl. If she rejects you and says she doesn't want to talk to you, ask yourself what lesson you can learn from this situation. Maybe first, I was dressed like a bum. Second, I didn't ask what she does and immediately asked for her number without telling her anything about myself. Third, maybe my testosterone levels are low and she doesn't see me as a man because I wrestle under the covers. And so by understanding these signs of feedback and improving yourself, you'll always grow and get better. There are no defeats or victories, only feedback from the world which you can turn into experience and use to become better. It's not that she's bad because she said no to me, and women only want money. That's what losers do, and you're not a loser. That can't be. Better to ask yourself how to become the kind of guy girls chase after and start taking those steps. Any feedback is experience. Regret from inaction is always harder than taking action. Part 6. Practicing with rejections. Next, to reinforce your new beliefs and constantly fuel your self-confidence, start keeping a victory journal. Every day, or at least a few times a week, write down all your victories, big and small. Don't miss a thing. How to keep a victory journal. Create a private Telegram channel just for yourself and record every victory. It can be anything. A successfully completed project at work, overcoming a fear such as skydiving or public speaking, mastering a new skill. The main thing is that it feels like a victory to you. Describe the essence of the event. Not just I did X, but I overcame my fear of heights and jumped from a 60-meter height with a safety harness, and realized that regret is always harder than taking action. Describe your feelings, thoughts, what you did, and what conclusion you drew from it. Attach proof, optional. If possible, attach a photo, screenshot, video, or even just a link that reminds you of that moment. This will amplify the emotional impact. Reread it occasionally. This is the most important point. When you feel insecure, when you doubt your abilities, open your victory journal. Reread your achievements. You'll see how much you've already accomplished and how many obstacles you've overcome. These accumulated victories will become the unshakable foundation of your self-esteem and strengthen your self-belief, proving that you're capable of much more than you think. And keep going to face rejections, because the fear of rejection often prevents people from taking action. Because of it, people don't ask for a raise, don't offer their services, don't make new connections, don't sell, and generally choose the safety of silence. But rejection isn't a catastrophe. It's a normal part of communication and life. The point of this exercise is to stop seeing no as a blow to your self-esteem. When you deliberately put yourself in situations where you might hear a rejection, your brain gets used to it. Nothing terrible happens. This reduces anxiety, builds confidence, and empowers you to act more boldly. Set a goal for 100 days and make one request a day. For example, asking a stranger to dance, asking someone for a ride to work, or asking a stranger for $1,000. Any request where you're afraid of hearing no, but you must do it for 100 days to become braver. And if you want to discover the invisible enemy that steals your motivation and prevents you from living your life, click on this video.